The snow fell in thick, lazy spirals, as if the heavens had grown weary and sighed a downy breath across the hills. Glenbrae lay hushed under winter's shroud, rooftops sagging with snow, chimneys breathing out smoke in desperate puffs, and the stream that once babbled through the glen now lay silent, frozen in a glassy stillness. The year was 1372, and in the far north of Scotland, the season came early and stayed long. In a low stone cottage, nestled against the slope of a hill, Elspeth McAlpin pressed her palm to the wooden door, feeling the cold seep through the grain. She was not a young woman, nor yet an old one, but she wore her years like a frost on the eaves, quiet, constant, unremarked. Her husband had died in the last winter, taken by a fever that burned even as the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Since then, she had been alone. Outside, the wind picked up, dragging with it the distant moan of something, perhaps the cry of a fox, or the whistle of wind through the pines. But here, alone in her cottage, it sounded more like a warning. Elspeth turned away from the door and crossed the packed dirt floor to the hearth. The fire had gone to embers. She knelt and fed it dry heather and a small wedge of peat. The flames licked up with a reluctant sigh. There wasn't much left: 3 more cuts of peat, 2 turnips, and a sack of barley that had gone soft with damp. The last time she'd seen the merchant's cart come over the hill was 3 weeks past, and she doubted it would return before the thaw. Still, there was comfort in the firelight. Shadows danced along the walls, trembling like spirits in the smoke-stained rafters. She sat in her chair and pulled a woolen shawl around her shoulders. Her hands, knotted from years of spinning and stitching, rested in her lap. Then came the knock. It was not loud, just a single, solid tap. Her breath caught. No one came up the hill this time of year. The crofters had huddled into their homes like mice. The laird's men had taken to the castle down in Strathlin, and even the wolves stayed away from fire and stone. The knock came again. She rose slowly, heart hammering with the fear that only comes in the stillness of deep winter. Taking the iron poker from beside the fire, she crept to the door. "Elspeth McAlpin," came a voice, low, male, and unfamiliar. She hesitated. "I," she called. "Who asks it? I mean no harm. I ask only for shelter. No one comes to Glenbrae in snow like this." A pause. Then, "That's why I ask. I am lost, cold. I have no food, and the wind will take me if you do not open this door." Elspeth closed her eyes. She was no fool. Her mother had taught her that a stranger in the night brought one of 2 things: ruin or revelation. Still, to turn a man away into the storm was a dark sin in the Highland code. She unbarred the door. The man who stepped inside was wrapped in a ragged cloak of brown wool, stiff with frost. Snow clung to his boots, his beard was caked in ice, and his eyes, pale gray and sharp as flint, scanned the room. With soldier's wariness, he did not smile. Elspeth stepped aside and let him in. "Thank you," he said. She said nothing, only gestured to the hearth. He knelt there, shedding his cloak and holding his hands toward the fire. Beneath the wool, his tunic was torn, and a dark stain ringed his ribs. He saw her glance and nodded. "An arrow. A fortnight past. It was pulled. Poorly." "You were in a battle?" she asked. "I was in something worse." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. Instead, she fetched a strip of linen from a chest and filled a basin with snow to melt over the fire. "I'll clean it," she said. He looked up, surprised. "You would have buried too many men to add another to the soil for want of a clean bandage." The man removed his tunic. The wound was red and raw, ringed with yellow. He clenched his jaw, but made no sound as she cleaned and dressed. At tea she worked silently, her hands steady, despite the heat of his fevered skin. When it was done, He sat back, breathing heavily. "You're no village healer," he said. "That was done like a surgeon. I was married to a soldier. He came back from war with more holes than armor. I learned fast." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if that satisfied some question. "My name is Aedan," he said. Elspeth said nothing. Names were dangerous things, especially in the Highlands, especially when worn like masks, outside. The wind rose again, and this time the cry that came with it was no fox. It was a long, mournful howl, answered by another, and then another. Elspeth turned to the window, where the dark pressed like a weight against the glass. "Wolves," she murmured. Aedan's eyes didn't leave her. Not just wolves. She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He stared into the fire, his voice low. "Something's hunting out there. Something that walks like a man, but doesn't bleed like one." The fire crackled, sending shadows leaping across the walls, as if the very stone trembled at Aedan's words. Elspeth sat motionless in her chair, hands tucked into her shawl, eyes fixed on the stranger. The wind moaned around the eaves, and the wolves howled again, closer now, as if creeping down from the ridge above Glenbrae. "Not just wolves," she repeated, her voice carefully level. "What else would howl like that?" Aedan didn't answer at once. Instead, he reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled free a small bundle, wrapped in deerskin and tied with twine. Elspeth's eyes narrowed. He untied it slowly and laid the contents before the Firelight. It was a scrap of fur-gray coarse, and matted with what looked like dried blood. But the color of it was wrong. It shimmered oddly in the light, as though woven with fine threads of silver or iron. "I took this," he said, "from a beast I met in the high pass above Loch Rona. It walked on 2 legs until it saw me. Then it dropped to all 4s and ran, like no animal I've ever seen. Fast, too fast. I only clipped it with an arrow, but when I tracked it to the river, there was no blood, just prints, and then none." Elspeth stared at the fur. Something deep in her bones stirred something ancient. Her grandmother had spoken of such things in whispered tones when Elspeth was a girl. Things that walked in the skin of man or beast, neither one nor the other. The Dowan SDH had many faces. "You should have left it where it fell," she whispered. "I couldn't," Aedan said. "It was wearing a brooch." He reached into the bundle again and held up a tarnished piece of metal. The firelight caught. The glint of worn silver shaped into the crest of a Highland house, an eagle with its wings outstretched and a sword in its talons. Elspeth went pale. "That's the sigil of Clan Mullane," she said. Aedan nodded. "I thought they were all dead. The last of them vanished years ago." "So they said," he replied. "But I followed the creature to the old Malline Tower above Loch Rona. The place is broken and roofless, but someone's been living there." There was smoke in the chimney, and bones. Too many bones. A long silence fell between them. Elspeth stood and poured a dipper of hot water from the kettle, setting it in front of him. Her hands were shaking. "You're saying the Mallins turned to what? Witchcraft? Werbeasts?" "I'm saying something unnatural walks the hills, and it wears a man's face." Aedan sipped the water. The steam fogged his scarred features. "I wouldn't have come here, truly, if I had another place to go. I just needed warmth, shelter. But if you want me gone, I'll go." Elspeth shook her head slowly. "If what you say is true, then the hills aren't safe tonight. I'd not send even a liar into that storm, let alone a man with wounds." Aedan looked surprised. "I thought you'd slam the door." "I considered it," she said wryly. "But I've lived in these glens my whole life. I know the difference between a blizzard and a bad omen." The wind shrieked suddenly, louder than before, and the fire guttered. Something banged against the shutters once, twice like claws scrabbling on wood. Aedan was on his feet in an instant, wincing as his side pulled. He grabbed the iron poker and stepped to the door. "Don't," Elspeth hissed. "Not yet." She moved quickly to the hearth and lifted a small iron kettle from the shelf. From beneath the hearthstones, she retrieved a leather pouch filled with dried herbs, boneset, juniper, foxglove, and a pinch of white heather. She dropped the mixture into the kettle and set it over the fire until it hissed and smoked. A bitter scent filled the room, earthy and sharp. "What is that?" Aedan asked. "Old Highland warding," she said. "My grandmother called it fire scents. It's said to keep the night things away." He didn't argue. The banging stopped. Only the sound of the wind remained. Aedan sat again, his face taut with fatigue and pain. Elspeth stirred the kettle, muttering old words under her breaths, fragments of forgotten Gaelic prayers. Half pagan and half Christian. Her mother had abandoned them, but she had not. At last, the fire flared bright again, and the smoke turned clear. The night stretched on, in the hours that followed. Aedan dozed restlessly while Elspeth sat watch, the poker in one hand and a small, wooden cross in the other. She stared at the door, half expecting it to burst inward with claw and fang. But nothing came. At dawn, the wind stilled. Snow still blanketed the glen, but a thin gold light filtered through the shutters. Elspeth rose and unbarred the door. The world outside was deathly quiet, muffled under drifts that reached nearly to the window ledge. She stepped out cautiously. There, in the snow, not 10 paces from her door, were tracks, huge tracks, not like those of any wolf she'd seen before. The paws were wide splayed, but deep to deep, as if whatever left them was heavier than it should be, and the stride she followed the line of prints for several feet was uneven, lurching, almost like someone walking on legs that didn't belong to them. She swallowed hard and backed toward the cottage. Aedan stood in the doorway behind her, pale and drawn. He looked down at the tracks and nodded grimly. It was here. They followed the prints to the tree line, where they vanished in a swirl of churned snow. Elspeth could see where branches had snapped, and bark was scored as if by claws or rough hands. "I don't know what game this is," she muttered, "but if it's hunting people, someone should tell the priest in Strathlin or the Reeve. They won't believe it," Aedan said. "They never do. They'll say it's wolves or madness, and people will keep dying. Then what do we do?" Aedan looked back toward. The tower of Glenbrae nestled in its drift of snow and smoke. "We set a trap." Elspeth blinked. "A trap? For that? If it's following me, it'll come again," he said. "It doesn't want to kill me quick. If it did, I'd be dead already. It wants to chase, like a beast hunting something it remembers. I was part of the company that cleared the Mullane Tower 6 winters past. We burned the place. Found signs of foul rites. The laird said to leave the bodies and let the snow cover them. I thought it was over, but something lived." He met her eyes. "I think it remembers me." Elspeth didn't ask more. They spent the day preparing. She showed him the root cellar, half frozen and damp, with smoked meat and dried herbs. They strung a small line of bells above the door and shuttered the windows tightly. Aedan crafted a snare using rope and a weighted beam, a soldier's cunning in every knot. They cooked what little food they had turnip stew thickened with barley and waited. The night fell slow and silent. No wind, no cries, just the oppressive quiet of deep winter. It came after midnight. The bells above the door tinkled once softly, as if stirred by breath. Aedan was already awake. He pressed his hand to Elspeth's shoulder and motioned for silence. She nodded, clutching her cross. Another jingle. Then a low sound, something between a growl and a whisper, slid under the door like smoke. It said her name, Elspeth. She went cold. Elspeth McAlpin, it breathed. Let me in. You remember me? Her fingers gripped the iron poker. I do not, she said, voice steady. And you are not welcome. You opened the door before. You were not wearing its face. The thing laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You kept his ring, Elspeth. You buried him with the white heather. I watched you weep. Her breath caught. It knew things only she knew. Aedan moved to the door. He held a long knife in his good hand and the snare rope in the other. Elspeth, the voice crooned again. I am cold. You have a fire. Let me sit by it. Just for a little while. You will not cross this threshold, she said, louder now. Not with that voice. It snarled, no longer pretending. A sudden weight slammed into the door. The latch buckled, the wood cracked, the bells rang wildly. Elspeth screamed as Aedan yanked the snare tight. With a crash, the top half of the door split inward. Snow billowed into the room, and with it came a shape all hunched, cloaked in fur and shadow. Its face was wrong, too long, too wide, with a grin that stretched across the cheeks like a wound. But it was caught, the snare whipped tight around its leg, and the beam dropped hard, slamming down with a crack that echoed like thunder. The thing shrieked, a sound like a man choking on ice. Aedan didn't hesitate. He drove the knife deep into its thigh. Black blood spurted, hissing as it touched the fire. The creature bucked and thrashed, but the snare held. Elspeth now. She flung the kettle of herb-scented water onto its face. The steam rose, thick and blinding. The creature screamed again and twisted free, but not before it left a patch of burning, smoking flesh behind, and then it was gone back into the snow, dragging its wounded leg through the drift. The night was silent again. Aedan dropped to his knees. Elspeth rushed to his side, helping him up. You wounded it, she said. He shook his head. Not enough, but it can be hurt. Aye, he said, eyes still fixed on the broken door, and it will come back. Dawn crept slow and silver over Glenbrae. The snow outside was untouched, except for one set of claw-dragged tracks. A twisted line that vanished into the forest where the trees stood tall and ancient, silent as gravestones. In the pale light, the air was sharp and brittle, like glass about to crack. Elspeth stood in the broken doorway, arms folded tight over her shawl, the scent of burned fur and herbs still clinging to her. Behind her, Aedan sat at the table, his wounded side rewrapped, the bandage now soaked with fresh blood. His face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed from pain and sleeplessness. Neither had spoken much since the attack. The creature had not returned, but its presence lingered like a smudge of soot on the soul of the glen. We can't stay here, Aedan said at last. I've nowhere else to go, Elspeth replied, not turning. You have kin. She shook her head. None close enough to matter, and even if I did, it would follow. You said yourself, Fit remembers. Aedan grimaced. Then we make for the priory at Loch Ardrin. The monks there hold old knowledge-warding rites, sacred texts, relics. If anything in the north can put an end to this thing, it's hidden among their shelves. Elspeth glanced at him. You're strong enough to travel. He gritted his teeth. I'll be strong enough. She said nothing, only turned and began to pack. There wasn't much. Some dried meat, barley bread wrapped in cloth, a flask of weak ale, and the charm box her grandmother had given her as a child. She wore it now on a leather thong around her neck, its wood, polished smooth with age. Inside were a twist of rowan bark, 3 poppy seeds, and a lock of her mother's hair. It would have to do by midday, They had sealed the broken door with boards and prayer. Elspeth cast a circle of ash from the hearth around the threshold, and left a bowl of milk beside Aedan, offering to the old spirits of the glen. Whether they would accept it, she didn't know, but respect was owed to the unseen things, especially. Now, they set off on snowshoes. The trail to Loch Ardron, winding through narrow pinewood paths and across wide open moors blanketed in drifts. The sky hung low and gray, the sun a dim smudge behind the clouds. Aedan moved with the steady rhythm of a soldier wounded but driven. Elspeth followed close, scanning the trees for movement. They didn't speak. Their breath steamed and vanished. But nightfall, they reached the edge of the forest known as the Black Brea stretch of ancient woodland, avoided even in the best seasons. Now, under snow and silence, it seemed to hold its breath. "There's a stone circle an hour's walk in," Aedan said, "old as the bones of the hills. If we reach it by dark, we can shelter inside it. You think that will protect us? I think the thing hunting us doesn't care for hallowed ground." They entered the trees just as the last of the light faded. Snow muffled every sound. The world turned to gray and white in shadow. The wind had stilled, but the trees groaned above them, ancient branches creaking under frost. Elspeth's every step felt watched, and then, from somewhere ahead, came a sound, not a howl, not a growl. A voice singing, distant, a woman's voice, high and lilting, like a lullaby sung through teeth. Aedan stopped. "Do you hear that?" Elspeth nodded, heart pounding. The song grew louder. The words were not in English, nor Gaelic, but something older, a tongue too twisted for any human mouth. She felt it in her teeth, a resonance like a wasp's hum behind her eyes. "Don't answer it," Aedan whispered. "Don't look." They pressed on. The song followed. Branches scraped at their cloaks like fingers. Once Elspeth thought she saw a figure, a woman in white, standing between the trees, face turned away. But when she blinked, the shape was gone. The forest opened suddenly into a glade, and there stood the stone-circled well slabs of weathered granite, leaning inward as if in eternal conversation. In the center lay a cracked altar stone, dusted with snow. They stepped within. The silence returned. The singing stopped, for the first time in hours. Elspeth breathed. They built a fire beside the altar, fed it pine cones and twigs until it casts a red glow across the stones. Aedan sank down, panting, clutching his side. The wound was worse. She could see the dark patch growing through his tunic. "Let me look," she said, kneeling. He shook his head. "Too much time, too little clean cloth. It'll fester. Just sit." She did. The flames flickered, and the stones cast strange shadows. Elspeth found herself staring at one in particular, a narrow slab, with spiral markings carved into the edge. She had seen such marks before, in old books and elder tales. They were symbols of binding, of banishment. She leaned in. The markings weren't weathered. They were fresh. "Someone's been here recently," she murmured. Aedan stirred. The monks, or the thing. She traced the spiral with her fingers. It was cut deep. Below it, someone had scratched 3 letters in Latin. PFV. Elspeth's brows furrowed. "Pactum fractum venator," she said aloud. Aedan looked up. "Oath-broken hunter," she nodded. "An oath-breaker is hunted." Suddenly the wind returned. It shrieked through the trees like a blade drawn from a scabbard. The fire guttered, and from the edge of the circle came a growl. Not loud, not near, but unmistakable. Aedan was already pulling himself upright, his blade drawn. Elspeth rose beside him, gripping the iron poker they'd carried from her hearth. The growl came again. A shape moved at the edge of the light, too tall, too thin, its limbs bent wrong. its head cocked at an unnatural angle. When it stepped forward, the firelight caught its face, and Elspeth's blood turned to ice. It wore the face of her husband, smiling Lachlan. She whispered. Aedan grabbed her arm. It's not him, but... Her knees buckled, her mouth opened, her breath caught in her throat. It took another step, and the fire flared, casting a bright line along the edge of the stones. The creature hissed and recoiled. The stone circle held Dot for now. Elspeth turned to Aedan, her voice shaking. It's bound by lines, by oaths. He nodded, breathing heavily. We used that. Where was the oath broken? He was silent then. I made the oath. She stared at him. You. I swore to destroy what was found in the Maulane Tower. I promised to burn it all. To finish it. But I didn't. I left one alive. A girl, barely more than 16. I thought she's no witch. Just a child. His voice cracked. She begged. I believed her. Elspeth's heart twisted. You spared her, and now I've doomed us. The growl came again, angrier now. Closer. Elspeth stood tall. Then, we unmake the oath. How? By keeping it. By finishing what you swore. She turned to the stones. There's power here. Old power. Speak the oath again. Bind it. He staggered forward and placed one hand on the altar. I, Aedan, Mac, Kerber, son of Cormac, do swear again to hunt the darkness I once spared. I renounce the mercy that spared it, and I bind myself to its end. Let no snow, stone, or spirit bar my path. The wind died, the fire rose high, crackling with green flame. The creature screamed, not a howl, a wail. It backed away, claws dragging. Through the snow, the face of Lachlan melted like wax, revealing something slick and pale beneath, like raw bone dipped in frost, and then it vanished. Elspeth fell to her knees. Aedan collapsed. Beside her, the fire burned low again, and above them, the stones stood silent. The morning after the oath was renewed, the snow fell lighter. Not gone, not melted, but softer now, gentler, as if the storm itself had eased its breath. Elspeth woke, curled beside the altar stone, her cloak stiff with frost and her limbs aching. Aedan lay still beside her, a pale sheen of sweat on his brow. His wound had worsened. The fever clung to him like a second skin. She stirred the fire back to life with numb fingers, using the last of their kindling. The flames licked upward, reluctantly, casting a sickly light over the stone circle. The symbols on the slab still glowed faintly, spirals of power carved by unknown hands. Aedan stirred, but did not rise. Elspeth, he murmured, voice thin. We have to finish it. I know. She pressed a hand to his brow. He was burning up. I'll go ahead, she said. To the tower. I'll see what's left. He tried to sit up, but faltered. Elspeth, if I don't. You will, she said, more fiercely than she felt. She pressed her grandmother's charm box into his hand, and wrapped him tight in every spare scrap of cloth they had. The stone circle would hold for a while. Then she strapped on her snowshoes, took the iron poker and Aedan's knife, and stepped into the trees. The path to the ruined Maulane Tower led north, winding through frost-bitten pine and over wind-swept moors. Elspeth walked alone beneath a sky the color of slate, her breath pluming before her like smoke from a dying fire. The glen was deathly still. Not even a raven called. Her thoughts spiraled with every step. Aedan had spared a girl. That girl had lived, and something, whether curse, demon, or dark magic, had taken root in her. The question was not whether Elspeth could find her. The question was whether she could end her by mid-morning. The tower appeared. It rose like a broken tooth from the hillside. blackened at the crown where fire had long ago scorched its upper floor. The outer walls were half collapsed, the gatehouse crumbled into ruin. No banners flew. No tracks marked the snow. Elspeth crossed the threshold slowly, the snow here undisturbed, as if the ruin itself refused visitors. Inside, the courtyard was a mess of old timbers and fallen stone, dusted with frost. Icicles hung like glass fangs from every ledge, and at the center, something waited. It stood by the old Wella woman, though barely, thin as a reed, wrapped in a patchwork of furs and cloth. Her skin was white as ash, her hair long and silver. She wore no shoes, though her feet were blue with cold, and her eyes were black as coal. Pupil and iris melted together in a depthless void. "You're the widow," she said. Her voice was cold and calm. "I saw your hearth." Elspeth raised the iron poker. "And I saw your face last night." The woman smiled. "That wasn't my face." It was what he remembered. "You're the girl Aedan spared." The smile vanished. "Aedan," she repeated, as if tasting the name. He broke his vow. They all did. "What did they leave behind?" Elspeth asked. "What did they let live inside you?" The woman tilted her head. "I was chosen, that's all. When they burned my family, the thing that watched from the woods came to me. It said, 'You were left. That makes you mine.'" Elspeth's grip on the poker tightened. "I was a girl," the woman continued, "but it taught me how to shed the girl, like a snake sheds skin. Now I wear memories. I wear faces. You wear death." The woman's smile returned. "And you're here to finish what Aedan didn't, if I must." The wind moaned through the broken archways. "You can't kill me with iron," the woman said. "The monks tried. The laird's men tried. Steel breaks on me now, I know." Elspeth stepped closer, never lowering the poker. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to bind you." That got the woman's attention. Her smile faltered. "Elspeth." "Macalpin," she said softly. "You know the old ways." "I know enough. Who taught you?" "The bones of your grandmother. The wind in the peat." Elspeth knelt and drew a circle in the snow with the tip of her blade. She pulled a small pouch from her belt, salt, ash, and the hair from the charm box. "The elements of a binding," the woman hissed. "You dare bring that into my home? This is no longer your home. It never was. You borrowed it, like a mask. But I'm here to take it back." She scattered the salt in a ring, then lit a small scrap of cloth soaked in oil. It flared and died, but the ashes glowed blue. The woman stepped backward, wary now. "Elspeth," she said, almost gently, "you could have stayed quiet, lived your years out in your stone hut, feeding chickens and watching the snow fall. You chose this." "No," Elspeth said. "Your kind chose me. When you wore my husband's face, when you came to my door." The woman bared her teeth. They were too sharp. "Too many. I should have come in." "You didn't." Elspeth reached into her cloak and drew out a long, thin needle of blackthorn, bound with red thread. "This belonged to my grandmother." She pricked the soles of stillborn calves to bring breath. She said it could poke the soul back into the world or out of it. She stepped into the circle. The woman lunged, but the moment her foot crossed the salt, she screamed, shoulders spasming, skin crackling like fire-dried parchment. Her limbs twisted, and she fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "You can't," she shrieked. "You can't unmake me." Elspeth held the blackthorn steady. "You made yourself," she whispered. "I'm just returning you." She stabbed the thorn into the woman's chest. Not hard, just a prick. The woman gasped, and the wind rose. All around them, the ruin shuddered. Snow burst upward in a swirling vortex. The sky darkened. The woman's form began to ripple, shimmer, melt. Her skin turned to smoke. Her face collapsed inward like cinders. And from within the husk, something crawled free. A shape of ice and shadow, long-limbed, hollow-eyed, not beast, not man. A scream of wrongness filled the air. Elspeth clenched her eyes shut and shouted thee, binding, by the salt of the earth, the blood of the kin, the ash of the fire, and the name that was Min I bind you. The shape clawed at the edge of the circle, but could not pass. It howled as if 100 mouths screamed at once, then dashed silence. The thing collapsed in two. Elspeth fell to her knees. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. The snow around her was scorched in a perfect circle. The ruin stood still. It was done. When she returned to the stone circle, the fire had gone out. Aedan was still alive, but barely. She knelt beside him, brushing ice from his lashes. "It's done," she whispered. "You kept your oath." He stirred, smiled faintly. "Good," then slept. Elspeth stayed by his side until night returned. That evening, the stars came out clear and cold, wheeling above the glen in slow constellations. For the first time in weeks no howls echoed from the hills. And the hearth in Glenbrae, though distant, was waiting for them. The fire at Glenbrae had gone cold. 3 days had passed since Elspeth had bound the creature at the ruins of the Malin Tower. She and Aedan had returned slowly, cautiously, step by aching step. His wound, though deep and festering, had stopped bleeding. The fever had broken sometime between the second night and the third dawn. When Elspeth woke to find him sitting upright beside the embers of their campfire, humming a low tune that had no melody but sounded unmistakably like hope. The circle of stones had held. The glen had stayed silent. They dared not speak too soon, but in the shadows beneath the pine trees, the air no longer felt thick with menace. The weight that had lingered since Aedan first knocked on Elspeth's door was lifting. The glen breathed again. When they reached her cottage, the door hastily patched before they left stood untouched. No new tracks in the snow, no scent of rot or sulfur. Elspeth crossed the threshold and felt, at last, that the silence was just silence. "I never thought I'd see this place again," Aedan said, lowering himself into the chair by the hearth with a wince. "Feels like 100 years since I first knocked." "You looked worse then," Elspeth replied, managing the smallest of smiles, though not by much. She set about rekindling the fire. The peat was damp, the hearth cold, but soon enough. The familiar pop and crackle filled the room. Smoke curled upward, and light chased the shadows from the low stone walls. Elspeth stirred a pot of oat porridge and set it beside him. They ate in silence. It wasn't until the last spoonfuls had been scraped from the bowls that Aedan finally asked the question that had hung in the air like fog. "Do you think it's over?" Elspeth did not answer at first. She walked to the hearth, knelt before it, and opened the small wooden box her grandmother had once given her. Inside, the poppy seeds were gone, burned in the binding rite. The hair had turned white, and at the very bottom, something new rested where nothing had been before. A sliver of obsidian, sharp as regret. She held it up. "The thing is gone," she said, "but it left a wound. In the land. In us." Aedan watched her, his face drawn but steady. "Then we heal it." That evening, they lit every candle in the house, not out of fear but as a vigil. For those who had died to the creature. For those who had lived beside it, unaware. For those who, like Aedan, had once made choices with consequences too dark to name. And for the girl who had once stood in a burning tower and been left behind. They didn't know her name, but they would remember her all the same. The winter dragged on, as it always did in the highlands. Snow buried the fields, and the sun rose late and left early. But the fear had loosened its grip. Word of strange happenings at the Mullane ruins reached the outer crofts. Some claimed they saw a blue light flickering among the stones. Others said they heard weeping in the wind. But no one else vanished. No beasts were found flayed in the woods. No dead men knocked on cottage doors in Strathlin. The monks at Loch Ardrin received an anonymous bundle, a pouch of ash, a blackthorn thorn wrapped in thread, and a note written in a steady, unfamiliar hand. A binding made, a debt repaid. Let the sacred ground be guarded still. The abbot read the note aloud, then burned it and scattered the ashes in the loch. They understood enough. Aedan stayed in Glenbrae through the spring. His strength returned slowly, as did the color in his face. The wound left a deep scar, but he wore it as he wore the others, without complaint and without pride. Each morning, he helped Elspeth in the garden, clearing snowdrifts, preparing soil, planting winter onions and barley. Each evening, they sat beside the hearth, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation that crept slowly into warmth. He told her stories of the southern wars, of false kings and broken oaths, of men who did not know the land and died in it anyway. She told him stories of her grandmother, how the old woman had spoken to birds and refused to cross bridges, and once cast out a fever with boiled rowan bark and the wing of a moth. They learned each other not in the way of courtship, but in the way of two branches grown in different directions that had, at last, found each other's shadow. When the first thaw came, Aedan stood at the edge of the glen and looked south. "I should go," he said. "There are others I need, to find others who made the same vow." Elspeth nodded. "But you don't have to go yet." He stayed one more week, then, on a morning bright, with meltwater and birdsong, he slung his pack over one shoulder and took the long road through the pinewood. She watched him go without words, just as she had watched him arrive. Only the season had changed. Time passed, as it always does. The glen bloomed. Wildflowers crept back into the meadows. The streams ran full and fast. Children from Strathlin began to venture near again in the summer, and Elspeth let them drink from her well, gave them oatcakes, and told them the story of a wolf that wore no fur. At first they laughed. Then they asked her to tell it again. And again, it became a tale they passed to their own children. A story told by firelight, with half-remembered words and a flicker of truth behind the fear. Some versions said the wolf had a silver tongue. Others, that it had once been a king. In every version, it came to a door in winter, and the door did not open. Years later, Elspeth received a letter. The ink was faded, the parchment old, the seal broken. Inside was a simple message. "We finished it. 3 left." The fire held. "Thank you, A." She folded the letter and placed it in the charm box beside the obsidian shard. She never wrote back, but every midsummer, she lit a candle for him and left it by the window. Some nights, when the wind was just right, she swore she could smell juniper and foxglove on the air. One final winter came, a harsh one, the hardest in decades. The snows buried the cottage so deep that the roof vanished. Wolves returned to the hills. People whispered again of cold fingers at windows, of dreams filled with faces not their own. Elspeth was old by then, her hair white, her steps slow. But the fire never went out. She kept the hearth lit, as her grandmother had taught her, and laid iron across the threshold. She never opened the door after sundown, and when she passed in the last days of the frost, they found her sitting in her chair beside the fire, a blanket over her knees, and the charm box in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were folded, and in the ashes of the hearth, something pulsed with faint red light, like an ember that refused to die. They buried her beneath the standing stones of the Black Brae, beside the altar where she had drawn her circle. The monks came, and the crofters, and even a rider from the south with a scar over his ribs, and white in his beard. He did not speak, but he stayed until nightfall. The glen holds its silence well. It is easy to forget what once haunted it. Easy to let the stories slip into the dark between memory and myth. But sometimes, when the snow falls hard and the wind howls just right, a traveler might catch a glimmer through the frost-smeared window of Glenbrae, a flicker of fire, a woman at her chair, and a wolf watching from the edge of the trees, but never crossing the threshold. The snow returned to Glenbrae with the quiet confidence of something that had never truly left. It came not in great storms or furious wind, but as a slow drift that fell for days soft, endless, burying tracks and paths, and even time itself. Beneath its pale shroud, the trees wore it like mourning veils. The roof of Elspeth's old cottage vanished beneath it. The hearth inside still stood, stone strong. The last place her fingers had touched, and inside the hearth, buried under layers of ash and peat, something waited. It was not a relic, not precisely. It was a memory. It stirred only once every few years, when the snow fell just so, when a certain silence settled over the glen. It had no name anymore, no clear shape. But it remembered warmth. It remembered hands. It remembered her. And so, on a night when the moon was hidden and the air held its breath, the hearth lit itself. Just a spark. Just one heartbeat of flame in the ash. Then gone again. But in that instant, the glen changed. Far to the south, in a village that had forgotten even the name of the Black Brae, a child awoke screaming. Her name was Mairi, 7 winters old, the youngest daughter of a cooper and a weaver. She had never seen snow that deep, nor known the sound of wolves in the hills. Her days were filled with ordinary joys, chasing chickens, whispering secrets to her sisters, picking wildflowers in spring. But the dream had not been ordinary. She'd seen a tower burning, a woman with white eyes whispering words in a voice that rattled like dry leaves. She'd seen a hearth cracked, blackened, and within it, something staring back at her, not with eyes, but with knowing. She had woken cold, so very cold. "Mary," her mother asked, rushing in with a candle. "What is it, love?" "The fire looked at me," she whispered. Her mother shushed her, smoothing her hair. It was just a dream. But in the days that followed, Mary grew quieter. She stared too long into the coals. She drew circles in the dirt with her finger, over and over again. And when snow began to fall and her village lay heavy and unseasonal, she stood at the door and said, "It's coming back." Her parents sent for the priest. The priest came, and though he smiled and spoke kindly, he left that evening troubled. That night, he wrote a letter. In the port city of Delmac, a man opened a letter, sealed in wax. His hands bore the scars of war, and a long-healed wound traced a pale line from ribs to hip. He wore no badge of office, no heraldic crest, only a worn cloak and a pendant of iron and ashdod. He read the letter once, then again, then he packed a satchel, fastened his sword, and rode north. His name was Aedan, and he had been waiting for a sign. By the time Aedan reached the village, the snow was knee-deep and still falling. He was no longer young. His hair was white at the temples, and his beard grew thick with gray. But his eyes had not dimmed, and his stride remained steady. He found Mary sitting alone in the church. "Do you remember the dream?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded. It wanted to come in, but the fire said no. The fire spoke, not with words. It remembered her. Aidan's breath caught. "She had a name," he said softly. "Elspeth." Mary looked up. "She's gone, isn't she?" He nodded. but not all the way. What do I do? Aedan hesitated. You listen, and you choose. He stood and turned to the priest. She has the sight, the gift. The priest frowned, or the curse. Depends on who teaches her. The priest looked at the girl. You'll take her. Not yet. Not unless she wants to go. But I'll stay. Watch. Wait. And so he did. That winter passed slowly. The snow never lifted. People whispered again about footsteps on rooftops. About dreams that came in pairs. About the wolves that came close, but never crossed into the village. They whispered of old. Magic of saints and demons. Of fires that burned blue and left no ash. But no one vanished. No doors were opened to strangers in the night. No children were taken. Mairi spent long hours with Aedan. He taught her not spells, but awareness. How to sit still long enough to hear the wind change. How to tell the difference between fear and danger. How to mark the turning of a season not by the sun, but by the sound of birds and the smell of bark. You won't always need to know what it is, he told her one evening by the fire. You just need to know that it's wrong. She listened. She remembered. And one morning, as the spring thaw began and the snow turned to slush in the fields, she asked, Will you take me to the place where she lived? Aedan nodded. The journey to Glenbrae was slow. The roads were half flooded. The rivers swollen, the trees dripping. But as they drew closer, the air felt cleaner, lighter. Mairi said nothing until they crested the hill and the glen came into view. She stopped. It's waiting. Aedan looked at her. Are you afraid? She shook her head. I thought I would be. But it's like stepping into a story I already know. They crossed the fields. The cottage still stood, though the roof had begun to sag under. Time and weather. A few slates had fallen. Moss clung to the chimney, but the walls held. They stepped inside. The hearth was cold, but not empty. A faint red ember pulsed in the ash. Mairi knelt. She's still here. She left something behind, Aedan said. A memory, a guard, a guardian. He shrugged. Perhaps. Or perhaps a seed. She reached out and cupped her hand over the ember. Not touching, just close. And the ember flared. A single flicker of fire rose, curled around her fingers, and then faded, but in her palm. Warmth remained. Mair. I looked at Aedan. I'm ready. The years that followed were quiet, but not uneventful. Mairi grew. Her sight grew with her. She did not become a witch in the way that frightened villagers whisper about, nor a priestess in robes and candlelight. She became something simple, deeper, a keeper. She mended roofs and brewed teas. She taught children the names of birds and how to plant onions by the signs of the moon. But she also walked the hills in the deep months of winter, carrying iron and ash and songs she never told anyone else. She never left Glenbrae, not because she couldn't, but because she was needed. The fire never went out. Aedan died one spring morning, in his sleep. Mairi found him seated by the hearth, wrapped in his old cloak, his hand resting on his sword hilt. His expression was peaceful. She buried him beneath the stone circle at Black Brae. At the foot of the altar, beside Elspeth, no name was carved, just a symbol in unbroken circle, flanked by thorns. Some say the glen is haunted, that lights can be seen drifting through the trees at night, that the wolves there never howl, that no one has been murdered in Glenbrae in 100 years, and no one knows why. But travelers who lose their way in the snow sometimes find an old stone cottage, where a woman with a warm voice and silver in her hair gives them a cup of tea and a place by the fire and in the hearth. Always there is a flame, a steady flame, a flame that remembers. In the years that followed Aedan's passing, The glen changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like snow melt easing into soil, slowly reshaping the land from beneath. People returned, not many, and not all at once. A stonecutter and his wife, a healer and her brother, a widow with 2 sons who were tired of cities and ghosts. They came not for magic or mystery, but for quiet and something else they could not quite name. They found Mairi living in the old cottage by the hearth. She didn't dress like a wise woman. She didn't speak in riddles, but she knew when to lay cold iron by a cradle, and which herbs to use when the moon turned sickly. She taught the children of the glen the names of storms and the songs of larks, and no house ever went unblessed during the spring thaw. She kept the fire lit, always, and in return, the glen kept its peace. No child vanished. No stranger bled beneath the trees. The winters were harsh, but survivable. The wolves kept to the edges of the forest, and never strayed too close, but still, Mairi waited. Because deep inside, she knew stories like this never ended, simply it was. The winter of her 33rd year, when the silence broke. She had risen before dawn to tend to the hearth, and lay out dried rosemary on the lintel for the solstice. The fire was strong, the peat dry. The wind outside howled against the window panes, but it was a friendly howl, a warning, not a threat. And then she heard it. 3 knocks, slow, measured, familiar. On the door. She did not move at first. Her heart slowed, instead of quickening. Her hand tightened on the iron poker beside the hearth. The knocking did not come again, but she already knew. She rose calmly and opened the charm box. Inside, the obsidian shard, the thorn wrapped in red thread, and the smooth token of blackened ash Aedan had once worn at his throat. She took all 3. Then she opened the door. Nothing stood there, not at first. Then, beyond the threshold, just past the little stone step, a figure emerged from the mist. It was a girl, not a child, not yet a woman, dressed in a tattered shift. Pale skin, silver blonde hair tangled by the wind. Barefoot, despite the snow, and eyes as black as wells. "Do you remember me?" the girl asked. "I remember all of you," Mairi said. The girl tilted her head. "You're not like her, Elspeth." "No, but I carry her fire." The girl stepped forward, but stopped at the edge of the threshold. "This place is thick," she said, "with memory, with rules. It's guarded." The girl smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was tired. "Then, I won't come in." "Didn't think you would." The 2 stood in silence. Behind Mairi, the fire popped. A spark flew onto the rug, then died. "I thought we ended you," Mairi said softly. "Years ago." The girl gave a slow blink. "You ended one, but not all. How many are left?" The girl shrugged. "Fewer, but enough." Mairi studied her face. "You're wearing someone." "Who was she?" "I don't remember. Only what she feared. She feared the cold. She feared being forgotten." That struck something deep in Mary's chest. "Why are you here?" "Not to fight," the girl said. "I've done that. Lost. Rebuilt. Lost again. Then what?" The girl reached into her ragged shift and drew something out. A bundle of roots. Twisted. Frozen. Still pulsing faintly with reddish veins. "I brought this," she said. Mairi stepped closer, wary. "What is it?" "A choice." Mairi reached out and took it. It was warm. Alive. But sick. "It's the last one," the girl said. "What we were. What we are. It's dying." I thought. Maybe it didn't have to end in fire. Mairi stared at the thing in her hands. "What would you have me do?" "Bury it," the girl whispered. "In the glen. In the heart of the old stone circle. Not with binding, not with ash, just burial. Mairi narrowed her eyes. So it can grow again, so it can rest. And if I don't, the girl shrugged. Then I suppose the wind carries it to another. She turned to go, her bare feet silent on the snow. Wait, Mairi called. The girl paused. You're tired, Mairi said. Yes, you don't have to go far, just. She stepped aside. You can come in. The girl blinked. I'm not allowed. You didn't knock to come in. You knocked to say goodbye. The girl stared at the fire, its glow reflecting in her black eyes. Will it hurt? No more than it should. She stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a wall. Her breath caught. Her eyes blinked rapidly, as if adjusting to something they hadn't known in years. She sat before the fire. Mairi said nothing. She placed the bundle of roots on the stones of the hearth. The flames' rosebud did not burn. Instead, they curled gently around it, warming, softening, letting the twisted shape uncurl and fall into ashdot. The girl watched, and then she cried. Not the howl of the hunted, not the shriek of the cursed, just the quiet sobs of someone who had been alone too long. Mairi placed a hand on her shoulder, and in the warmth of the hearth, the black began to drain from the girl's eyes, leaving behind only pale gray. They found the girl in spring, helping Mairi plant turnips, and laughing at the way the crows watched from the fence posts. No one asked where she'd come from. No one needed to. She helped repair the roof, carried water from the stream, fed the hens, and at night, she listened to Mairi recite stories from a worn leather book that had once belonged to Elspeth. The fire never faltered, and no knocks came. Again, years passed, seasons turned. Mair, I grew old. When she passed, she did so. The same way Elspeth had quietly, with dignity, in her chair by the hearth. And it was the girl now, a woman with silvered hair and storm-gray eyes, who kept the fire after her. She tended the glen. She told the stories. She learned the names of every shadow and made peace with all of them. No one remembered her old name, but they knew her as Bree, the one who mended. And so the tale passed, not of curses, but of care. Even now, in the depth of winter, if you walk the old road through Glenbrae, you may find the cottage still standing, a flicker of fire in the window, a kettle singing low, and if you knock, gently, 3 times on the door, someone may answer, not a ghost, not a curse, but a keeper, and you will be welcome, so long as you bring no harm and carry something worth remembering.